Hey, Gayatree, let's start.
There we go.
Yay, hello. Hey, how are you today? How is the weather in Norway?
I think it's okay. Once it's gone up in terms of temperature, I'm fine. So I think we're hitting like 10 degrees today, which
Oh,
I am very happy with.
okay, good. I'm sorry, that was my double voice. All right, let's tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I am originally from the Caribbean. I'm from the very small island of Trinidad and Tobago. I've been living in Norway for the past 5 years. Um, I actually started my career in HR. Yeah, so I started in HR, moved to the UK, and I really commend people who work in human resources because that's something I really can't do, that big structure and a lot of paperwork and stuff like that. And I needed to do one-on-one work. So I started to volunteer and decided that psychology is where I want to go. So I do have qualifications, bachelor's in business. But yeah, I finished my postgraduate work in psychology in 2004. Since then, I've been working as a psychologist, psychotherapist is what I prefer. And I've worked with primarily victims of sexual trauma. So for the last 18 years, I've primarily worked with child sexual abuse survivors, domestic violence survivors, organized crime. I worked in the Caribbean for over 8 to 10 years, and there's a lot of organized crime. So I worked with survivors of gang violence, as well as survivors of human trafficking. So that spans what I have been doing.
Yeah,
Um,
besides psychotherapist, you have neuro-linguistic practitioner in your
I
LinkedIn
do,
bio.
I
Why
do.
is that? Why is that interests you?
Well, what happened is that while working in therapy, you're working with clients who have like really traumatic past experiences, and you're working with them long term. So at some point, they're ready to live in their present and think about what they want for their future. And about 10 years ago, I was like, I have the resources to work with them, working with their past trauma. Then I started to explore. So, how do we start working in your present and exploring the outcomes you want based on the resources and learnings of the past? And I started to hear about neuro-linguistic programming, but it didn't pique my interest until I started to actually need coaching for myself. And I chose the path of getting someone who was a neuro-linguistic programming practitioner. And it works so well because what happens is that you take a person in their present and you use their resources of their and their learnings from their past to create strategies and goals for the future outcomes. So neuro-linguistic programming is where we change behaviors and thoughts to get the desired outcomes. And there are different ways in which we do it. And there are a number of different techniques. So for instance, we have perceptual techniques, which kind of like helps us look at our own biases and assumptions and reflect on it and change it. Maybe alter it a bit, because when we're looking at our biases, we're looking at experiences from our past. From the time we're born, we're experiencing things. And we create perceptions which alter the reality of the world. So we all have biases. We have explicit biases and implicit biases. So there are techniques that help us to look at those biases and alter the way in which we think about things. And then there are techniques that are specific to behavioral. So like if you want to create very particular outcomes for the future, you're going to create very specific goals to get there. And you would need very specific types of strategies. So neuro-linguistic programming helps you to create these strategies with very particular techniques. Then we look at the communicative side of it. And a lot of businesses actually engage this part of the neuro-linguistic programming, where we talk about rapport and body language and how much of our body language we actually use when we communicate. So a fun fact with NLP, some of the research in NLP is So one thing that came out for me is that, did you know that in every interaction we have, all, in terms of our sensory inputs, we receive information every day from our five senses, yeah? Did you know that we receive 11 million bits of information per second? And did you know that we only retain 16 to 40 bits of that information consciously, and a substantial amount we actually store in our subconscious?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And more research into NLP, I'm not only talking about NLP, just psychology on the whole, is that when we look at face-to-face communication and why it's so important to understand communication, we only, in face-to-face communication, all the classical and empirical studies shows that when we communicate, we actually only register 7% of the words that is being said, 38% of the tone. So we're picking up on the tone that anyone is using when they're communicating with us. But there's a massive 55% that we engage in when it comes to body language. So that's why communication is so important. Meshing soft skills and body language is so important.
So this is probably why a lot of us, when we go to school or university and we leave the classroom and we remember little about what was told there.
That's right.
This is the problem. This is the problem. Okay, let's proceed to the interesting part of how you can tell us more about your field. And my first question to you, if you could have any superpower for the day, how would you use it to advance your field?
So one of the things I really like is when I meet people who are empathetic. I
Mhm.
feel as though they see things differently. So if I had a superpower for the day, it would be that I have a magic wand. Now I have a young child, a young daughter, so I have been watching a lot of magic shows. So visually, I'm seeing a magic wand. And she also likes science. So she said to me, she said there's something called the exosphere. That's where the satellites and stuff that's
Mhm.
really far up. So she said satellites up there. So I would have that superpower of being able to transcend to that space in the exosphere with this wand and give people a little 20% more empathy. So just do that, and the whole world has a 20% more empathy, not 100%, just 20% more, just to bring awareness that everyone is different. We're all experiencing things different, and the decisions that we make are sometimes shadowed by maybe biases and assumptions that we have of other people and their lives. And I think with just a little 20%, we can bring an awareness to how our own words and actions impact others. So maybe my superpower would be a wand with empathy.
Yeah, I also believe if we were just a little bit more open, we would perceive people, their problems, and the information they give us in a better way. This is true. This
I
is true.
agree.
My second question, what is the biggest misconception about your field that you would like to dispel?
Oh, there's so many misconceptions.
Anyone that you, for example, you cannot stand the most?
Oh, this massive stigma against mental health. Oh, I don't know if it's because I come from I think sometimes I think I come from a society where it's so traditional that it's not okay to say things sometimes. So I've experienced the stigma against mental health for myself, but also with so many of my clients. I mean, it's 18 years to 20 years worth of listening to people and their stories and their history. And when we talk about mental health, we also kind of say that mental illness is not real. And there's a vast difference between mental health and illness. And mental health is where there's like, mental illness is when there's a significant disturbance in how people think about things and how they're able to regulate emotions when they think about these things, and how they are not able to behave appropriately based on their environment. So when we talk about mental illness, it's actually medically diagnosed. There are psychotic disorders, and there is a danger to the person and themselves and the people around them. So it's really important that we recognize that mental illness is real, my perspective. Mental
Yeah.
health
Mhm.
is where we are, when we talk about good mental health, we're talking about being able to regulate our cognitive thinking. We're able to say that this thought isn't healthy for us, and we can actually rationalize our way into changing that thought pattern, which would lead to different emotions that are more congruent to what we want, and we would behave a certain way. So are better able to balance it. So that's one of the things that I really struggle with in my field. Right now, I don't know if I'm sure you're familiar with the word mindfulness, and a lot of times people talk about mindfulness. And I also think a lot of times people don't understand it fully. Mindfulness is really being present in every single moment, even with a thought, and a thought may be uncomfortable. So mental health and mindfulness goes hand in hand. If you have a thought that isn't creating the emotions that you want, then you can, in mindful practice, create or shift your thought process to create what you want in that moment. And that's when you know you are in that present moment and enjoying that moment. Mindfulness can be anything. It can be in a process of enjoying food. Like, I really like food. I love textures. I like flavor. I like to actually decipher flavor. So when I'm eating, I eat very slowly and I enjoy the flavors. And that's mindful eating. We can do that in interactions. We can do that in just taking a walk. Sometimes taking a walk off the trodden path is better than following the path, because you're becoming more mindful of the steps that you take, the environment around you, and your mind is actually 100% clear at that point, because you're so focused on your body movement and your mind interaction. So yeah, it's a stigma around mental health.
I personally relate to this a lot because right now I invest a lot of time in my mindfulness in terms of, living each day to its fullest, like actually being present. Because I personally come from a Slavic country and there's a huge stigma there. People, they do not go to, mental health therapists at all. You're supposed to deal with it on your own because,
Right.
such thing as mental illness does not exist there. So I understand and I relate to this problem a lot. So
I appreciate
mindfulness is
that.
super important for me. The next question is, what's the most interesting dream or vision you had that relates to your field?
I have to say harder because now I'm in Norway. I have a different experience of mental health. But while I was in the Caribbean, most of the population that I worked with was victims of domestic violence. And I think this went on for like 8 years. So I would see at least, I mean, you're doing walk-in clients. You don't know what to expect on any given day sometimes. So at least 5 to 8 women, men, children would come into your space. And I'm just giving context to why this dream was so important. And I had this really massive dream of like having this space. It was acreage. It was like probably 10 acres of just land where you can see everywhere. There wasn't any hidden spots. And in that space would have a place of communal living where it was absolutely sustainable, self-sustainable. And these women, because the women came from very at-risk type communities. So by that, I mean, maybe gang related, maybe they're vulnerable to crime. There was a lot of that. So there was always something of a threat towards them. So in my vision, they would be able to find this safe space and get their education to a point where they feel successful enough and empowered enough to reintegrate into society. They can learn new skills and not have to look over their shoulder. And there would be a massive agricultural area as well, because I do believe that nature and mental health go hand in hand. And they would be able to plant their own food, grow their own whatever they need, produce, I think, livestock. I'm not familiar with agriculture and stuff like that, but this was the vision. But yeah, I probably still wish it. If I had the resources, that is something I would probably like, delegate towards someone.
Oh, it's actually pretty much connected to my second question. If you could work on any project, if you had unlimited resources, what would you like to do? It's not, connected specifically to your field, but you started talking about resources, so maybe you can elaborate more on this.
Well, that's one of the things I would definitely allocate resources to. But when I think about that question, and I could use it in context to the same vision, a network of volunteers. Like, I feel as though sometimes volunteers don't get to effectively share their skills where it's needed. And I feel as though if we have a network of volunteers of different skills, from finance to HR to mental health, it doesn't matter what, and we're able to resource non-governmental agencies and foundations and charities, from the smallest to the largest, and to find the right people to facilitate this, giving their skill, not necessarily a large amount of time, not necessarily money, but like just their skill. I would give resources. I would love to be able to do that. And I think there are like thousands and thousands of people across the world who would love to do something like that. It's just that, where do we go sometimes?
Yeah, this is true. Wow, thank you so much. I do wholeheartedly hope you will one day have enough resources to make it come true. Is there something, to make it the best end ever of like our lives? What is the one advice maybe you'd like to give to the audience about mental health, mindfulness, something to remind our audience about anything that would make the best end of our life?
I think living in the moment is important. Sometimes it's not always easy. There's this thing in NLP that we say, the mind and the body is the same, and once you move your mind or your body, the other responds to it. And a lot of times, I mean, every single individual, including my 11-year-old daughter, gets very caught up in thoughts. And that creates anxiety to the point that you can't function. And if I have to give anybody any sort of advice, when you have that moment where your thought overwhelms you and you can't, and you don't have the mental resources to shift that thought process, get up and go for a walk, plank, do 10 jumping jacks, but get your body moving, literally dance, anything. But get your body moving and your mind moves as well.
It does releases a lot of stress. I can confirm.
Yes. So that's one bit of advice I would give. It's something that works. It's very easy to do, and I think anyone can do it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for this great life. I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you again. And thank you so much for being our Glick mentor. If you would like to chat more with Gayatree, you're free to book her on our website. Thank you so much. Have a good day, guys.